best not to wait for long.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Happy third meeting of the Climate Action Plan Task Force for the City of Mill Valley, and I'm calling the meeting to order. And we will start with public open time. Do we have anyone from the public on the line, Danielle?
We do not. So no public open time.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we can use the time elsewhere.
Yep.
Okay. And then just a quick logistical check-in to make sure that the order of the agenda is how it should be this evening to accommodate for any schedules of folks that need to duck out early for any reason. Danielle, just wanted to check on that.
We have two speakers tonight. They are aligned with the schedule, so they'll probably drop off after their presentations, so we can ask questions before they potentially leave the call. And that would be around 7 o'clock, I think, is their deadline that they need to leave by.
Okay. Okay, great. So we'll keep moving. Next up is approval of the October 20th meeting minutes. If there are no comments or suggested edits to what's been published, Susan?
I have a comment. Sorry, I just want to pull it up real quick to review it before I speak. Here we go. There was a section that said, in regards to the cap target, and I know we're still, this is still in motion, but I had voiced some opinion about it in our last meeting, and I just wanted to make sure that that was reflected. The section that talks about the members discussed initial greenhouse gas reduction targets for the plan and agreed to use a bottom-up, it's missing word too, agreed to use a bottom-up approach that first calculates emissions reductions for initial strategies and then considers how, this is the part, and then considers how to set more aggressive targets. At a minimum, should meet statewide target for 40%. The part about setting more aggressive targets, I would like to, I had talked about last time that I would like to see us consider setting 100% emissions reduction target by 2030 specifically, and looking at how we could do that. And I would like to have that reflected in the minutes, because I believe I talked about that last time.
Right. So I think what we're trying to do, it says that we're going to look at targets. The idea is these are action minutes, so it reflects basically the decisions made by the committee as a whole, and not individual requests.
Okay.
Just because that helps streamline the work effort that we need to do, and we can use the video as part of understanding what each individual is interested in. So targets we'll circle back on targets, and then the committee will make that decision together.
In a future meeting?
Yes.
Okay. That covers it. Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with the one change that a person named Motion did the second motion in the first sentence, but other than that, I think it's Mr. Mo. Other than that.
I'll second the motion.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, thank you. And then just a reminder that we're going to move on to committee and staff announcements. It's really helpful for folks to use the raise hand function. So if you can continue to do that, I really appreciate that. Any committee or staff announcements for items that are not on the agenda this evening? Urban.
Sorry, I'll make this very quick. So just to give everybody a heads up, so East Blythedale is a big project in Mill Valley. It's roughly a $10 million project, and it relates to mobility, which of course impacts greenhouse gas reduction. And just so you know, that's going to go out to bid in the beginning of the year. There's going to be a council meeting on December 6th where that's going to be discussed. And there might be some discussion around some limited bike facility between Park School and downtown. And so those of you who are interested in that might consider watching that meeting or even attending that meeting.
Thank you for that. Any other announcements? Okay, great. So great, we can move on to the presentations this evening. We have a couple of speakers and we're starting with Amy Ryder for Building Decarbonization and Coalition.
So sorry to do this to you, Debbie, but I think we're going to have Christine and I are going just to provide a brief overview to connect what we're talking about tonight in terms of Mill Valley, and then we'll hand it over to Amy to talk about the decarbonization, and then we'll move to Brian, and that will provide a global picture, and then we'll go back down to the countywide level with Brian. So I apologize, but I think it might be helpful. So
yeah, perfect.
Okay. So Amy, 1 second. We're going to start first with Christine. I'm going to share this screen. Okay. Okay.
Are you putting in slideshow view?
I'm trying to, but this
okay.
is in the way. Can you see that big thing in the middle that says?
It says, please move this window away from the shared application.
Okay. I don't know why that's like that. Let me try this one more time. I apologize. Okay. Here we go.
All right, there you go. Okay. Great. So we just wanted to give you all kind of, as Daniel said, an overview. And this is, we talked about this in the first meeting. This is a look at the emissions by sector. This is for 2019. And next slide. Tonight, we're really focusing on the built environment, and we break down the built environment into this natural gas and electricity. So again, the natural gas is a huge slice of this pie at 34%. So about a third of the emissions are coming from natural gas used in the built environment. Built environment is only about 7% at this point. It's shrunk over time. Next slide. So the natural gas consumption is down 10% since 2005. Could you go ahead and advance the bullets? There we go. I think we talked about this. The natural gas use is really highly correlated with outdoor temperatures. But as the world continues to warm, we'll probably end up using less natural gas to warm our buildings. And again, the emissions from the natural gas are really the biggest part of the built environment. They're now representing 83% of the emissions from energy use in Mill Valley. Next slide. And then we look at electricity. So electricity consumption is also down. It's actually down more. It's down 18%. And emissions have dropped quite a bit more. They're down 72%. And that's because of the lower carbon intensity of our electricity. That all started with MCE in the beginning, and PG&E's electricity has been getting a lot cleaner over time as well. So next bullet, and one more, there you go. So MCE at this point is supplying almost 3/4 of the electricity in Mill Valley. A little over 13% of that electricity is deep green, and that's actually a really high amount of deep green for comparison across the MCE entire service area. Only 3.6% of that is deep green. So this is almost 10% higher than the average. And there is a state law that's requiring electricity to become cleaner as well. So 60% will have to become from renewable resources by 2030, and to be completely GHG free by 2040. So that 45, I mean, so that does impact PG&E electricity as well as electricity that comes from direct access sources. And next slide. Oh, and that's right. MCE is also structuring their light green portfolio to be approximately 95% GHG free by 2022. So that's something that we will incorporate into our GHG reductions as we are doing those calculations. And then this slide is just about solar installations in Mill Valley specifically. And this is done by zip code. So this is going to include some of the unincorporated areas that have the Mill Valley zip code. The installations tripled between 2019 and 2020. So that's, you're looking at that orange part of the bars there. And so far in 2021, so that data there, I think is just, yeah, it's just through July 30th. And we're on track actually to surpass the amount of solar that was installed in 2020. So I'm not sure why there's been this huge increase in solar PV since 2019. It may be due to the availability and feasibility of installing battery storage with the PV system. So, you know, with the PSPS events, a lot of homeowners are really interested in increasing their home's resiliency and avoiding those power shutoffs. And we've noticed also that battery storage has increased as well since 2019. So in 2020, 72% of the PV projects included battery storage. And so far in 28, we're running at about 68% of those projects are including battery storage. So that's actually a really interesting and positive thing that's happening. So next slide, and I think you're going to take this over here, Danielle. And Danielle, you're muted.
Thank you. And again, I'm not sure why. Ignore that thing in the middle. I apologize. So these are just some terms. Brian might go over them more from the county as part of his presentation, but I just want to try to get everyone on the same level playing ground of some of the terms that we'll be talking about in terms of green building. So we started a long time ago when the state really wasn't meeting expectations in terms of green building, and we did our own thing. And since that time, the state of California has really started to work on streamlining and also making things a lot easier for, I believe, contractors to understand the requirements jurisdiction by jurisdiction through their Cal Green standards, which is based on the California Building Code. So there's a general Cal Green building code. Then there's different tiers that we can also local jurisdictions may adopt. So tier 1 is an energy efficiency with some electives, and that's about, I believe it's 15% higher in terms of energy efficiency. And then tier 2 is about 30% higher energy efficiency with also even more added electives. So when we're talking about tier 1, that's basically a little more than the Cal Green standards. Then there's some reach codes, and that again is trying to reach out, going past the Cal Green standards. And I imagine Brian will explain this better, but an example is the electric vehicle charging. That's a reach code, and that's something that the city has adopted. There are also places that have adopted some solar requirements in areas. When we mention Title 24, Title 24 is basically the energy portion of the Green Building Code. I also have Kathy Tui, our building inspector, on the phone call and Zoom call. She'll be able to answer questions, and that's the planner talking. That might not be exactly the way it's phrased, but basically in a kindergartner's terms, it's Title 24 is related to energy efficiency. As part of this Title 24 and the energy efficiency, it's really important to know that if we want to go to tier 1 or tier 2 and include energy efficiency, that we have to have that basically a study to show that there's not a cost burden on the standards, and that is approved by the Energy Commission as part of the building code. So the building code is updated every 3 years. The next one is we'll be working on in December. It must be adopted by January 2023. And so the city of Mill Valley not only is Cal Green Tier 1, but we also require Tier 1 and the requirements of new building as part of any renovation or home that has more than 50% of the structure removed or added onto. So that is just basically an understanding. I think we can come back to some of these. I want the presenters to provide more information, but I just wanted to show you an example of what is filled out at the building counter as part of doing the due diligence of reporting the use and meeting our standards. So they have to indicate that they have met the standards of green building, submit the checklist. Also, we have an EV readiness requirement. That's a electric vehicle readiness, and then this energy efficiency and electrification option. So those are the things that are required as part of this. Is for new or major renovations. And this is an example just of the checklist that is part of CalGreen. There's 5 different sections. And this shows, with Tier 1, these are mandatory things that need to be done as part of Tier 1. And then there's options that you get to choose. And this says select 2 in this water efficiency area, and you select 2. So this whole checklist is submitted to the City of Mill Valley and reviewed as part of approving a building permit. So with that, I am going to stop sharing, and I know that's probably a lot of information, but just as a backdrop to the next conversation for the presenters that will talk more about the global level as well as the countywide efforts. So with that, Amy.
Yeah, thank you.
There you are.
Good evening, everyone. So, thanks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about REACH codes, but with a twist this evening. Share a little bit about what's been happening across the state, as well as some of the interesting opportunities that Mill Valley has as a city to take some action. So just by way of introduction, though, I am Amy Ryder with the Building Decarbonization Coalition. And who the heck is that? We are a membership-based nonprofit that represents all kinds of different entities, including local governments, but also manufacturers of a variety of electric appliances and designers and utilities and a number of other entities across the country. So my presentation is not very long, but I'm hoping to give you some updates as to what's happening with the Energy Code starting January 1st of 2023, just to expand on the great definitions that were given about Title 24 Energy Code. So the 2022 code is the name for the code that starts in 2023. So just if I slip into that, my apologies, but just be warned that that's what I'm referring to as the next code cycle. We're currently in the 2019 code cycle, but the 2022 is this next forthcoming one that again starts in 2023. We'll go over some of the options of what others have done with regard to new construction and some forthcoming exciting things related to existing building climate action. So new construction and the code. So this is all been approved by the California Energy Commission and goes to the Building Standards Commission at the state for final approval next month. But I'll just give you some really big highlights. And this is a little nerdy, but I was asked to speak to it, so we'll try to keep it as relatable as possible. But there's some big changes in the energy code coming for this code cycle. Probably the biggest one is that there's been a structural reorganization. Historically, the code has fallen into 2 parts, which has been low-rise residential and non-residential, which included mid and high-rise. And all of the multifamily has been pulled out of both of those sections and stuck into its own section now. So what that means from a code perspective is that there's a new set of rules that only applies to mid and high-rise multifamily. And that's true for the base code, but it's also true for any REACH codes or the Green Building Code. Well, the Green Building Code is organized differently anyway. We don't need to get into that detail, but for the conversation, just so you understand, there's different rules that apply to these different building types. And because of that, we have different metrics of success when you're talking about energy efficiency. And so the next big piece is that the residential, the single family specifically, uses what's called an energy design rating. And historically, that has been just based on how much energy and the value of that energy is available during any portion, any hour of the day, seasonally. And that has been what gets compared against when you have two different buildings for showing compliance with the energy code. Now there's a whole component that actually is starting to take into account the climate element of how clean is the energy when it comes to you. So this is just kind of an exciting change for the energy code across the state, because it's recognizing that greenhouse gas emissions and the climate impact of our built environment actually matters and should be considered when building and designing new construction projects. So let me know as we go through as we have questions. So big changes, though, I just wanted to point out there are a couple of major things in addition that, again, gets a little weedy, but what this is they're starting to look at requiring electric appliances for major elements of new construction. So in particular, all new buildings in the state of California starting in 2023 will have, and this is for all residential buildings of any size, either electric water heating or electric space heating. You have to have one or the other, and it depends on where you are in the state. And so that's slowly moving everybody in the state closer and closer to all electric. And as we saw in the introductory presentation, that has a climate benefit. So there's good reasons to do so. There's also some differentiation in terms of standards around if you're using gas for cooking, you actually will have to have higher ventilation rates over your stove. So a range hood will need to pull more air out of the space in recognition of the fact that when gas burns in a cooking application in particular, there are health impacts to that. So there's a differentiation in what's required. If you're cooking with electricity, you still need a range hood, but it doesn't have to pull as much air out of the space. So all of that starts to hint also at what's coming in future code cycles, which is more grid integration and better resiliency. So actually allowing for the electricity sector and the electrical grid to be more responsive to disaster, but also to help us have more localized controls, and really recognizing both the impacts on the grid around climate, but how to minimize those elements. The other piece that's important to recognize is pre-wiring and readiness for all electric everything, regardless of building type, is continuing to be a trend. So happy to answer questions about that if people are curious, but that's a real quick overview of what's coming in regard to decarbonization in the next code cycle. Moving on to just some of the legal options that we've seen and kind of precedent in the local government space. There are lots of legal options for how local governments, cities and counties, as well as towns, can take action on their own with regard to their climate action initiatives. And definitely we've seen, I won't walk through all of these because REACH codes and the prohibition of gas infrastructure are by far the two that have been popular and talked about with regard to new construction. And so we're seeing that happen. And most people call those combined REACH codes. So they work slightly differently, but for all intents and purposes, we can say they go above and beyond some code. And in this case in particular, they're starting to move again towards that all electric future for new construction. Just to give you a little bit more nuance, as was discussed in what you already do and in and around Marin County, you have some of your sister cities are are following through with many things already, but there's kind of three primary new construction approaches that have come to the surface. The natural gas moratoriums, which Fairfax just passed one fairly recently, which effectively says that no new piping to a building can be installed. The all-electric ordinance, which is the most common approach, which can be appliance specific. And we're seeing this happen across the state where basically it is an all-electric building, or at least has all electric specific appliances, versus the electric preferred option, which is actually really uncommon in Northern California. We see this more in the South, where there's an incentive for those who are using all electric in new construction, and anyone who chooses to keep a dual fuel or mixed fuel approach then has to get an even higher energy efficiency score. So the way that breaks down, just so you know, there are 52 local governments in California who have passed an ordinance of this kind so far. This number grows weekly pretty much at this point, and has for the last couple of years. This is all under, as I said, the 2019 code cycle. So many of the cities will need to readopt under the 2022 code cycle, but this is how it has shaken out. And as I said, the all electric approach is by far the most popular. So I just wanted to spend a couple minutes to talk also about existing buildings, because this is a conversation that everyone seems to want to have, is after we can figure out how to deal with new construction, what do we do with the existing building stock that we have? And that's where this chart comes back in, and we have all these other items. So just very quickly, I'll say that there are emissions limits on appliances. This is something that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is looking at carefully right now, potentially regulating appliances based on their emissions, their nitrogen oxide specifically. There's also a couple of cities looking at the potential to replace appliances and upgrade to electric at various trigger points, including whenever you get a permit to replace a piece of equipment, or potentially at the time of sale. And then these green ones here are kind of longer term strategies that communities are starting to look at, in that potentially even stopping the service for natural gas, that's but at a date certain many years away, often decades away, versus the building emissions standards, which is a ramp down over the course of time with how much you're allowed to emit at any given building. And I apologize because I know this is a lot of information, but I'm happy to address questions as we go through. I did want to highlight very briefly, though, that the emissions limits on appliances it's a really big conversation right now, and I'll be actually giving a little bit more information on this in a presentation tomorrow. So I gave you a nerdy slide just for fun, which is, as I said, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. That's what BACMUD, that crazy acronym at the front, says. They're looking at these NOx standards. So that's the nitrogen oxide emissions that come from burning gas in our usually water heaters and space heaters. And they're looking at these rules where effectively, if you went to a zero NOx water heater, that is an electric water heater as of today's current technologies available. So this would potentially disallow the sale of gas appliances by 2027. So just know that there's lots of elements in the works. And then the CARB is the California Air Resources Board, which is a similar agency, but for the state. And they're also looking at similar regulations. And the reason they're doing this is all under the Air Quality Act. It's a federal mandate that they track and regulate air quality across the state. And they're finding that as we get cleaner and cleaner, similar to as our electricity gets cleaner, natural gas looks worse. As we get cleaner and cleaner about so many emissions profiles, there's the need to find the root source of what's causing smog and other pollutants in our air gets smaller and smaller. So as our cars get cleaner, we're starting to look at buildings. So that's it for me in terms of formal presentation. But again, I'm sure there will be questions, but thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Amy. We may need to bring your one of your slides up for some of the questions. Questions from the task force? Hi, Karen.
Amy, I have two questions. Did I read that slide and understand correctly that 61% of the California governments are going to require all electric for new buildings in 2023? Did I read that slide correctly?
No, so that is current requirements from the 52 governments that have already passed that ordinance. So it's of those who have adopted REACH codes that deal with electrification in this code cycle, 63% of them have gone all electric.
Okay. Okay. And my second question is a slide or two after that. You said that one of the topics was you were going to measure emissions in existing homes. How are cities doing that?
So no one is doing that at the home scale yet. Okay. That is usually a commercial building standard. And in fact, no one's doing it in California yet. That is something we're seeing. New York City has an ordinance, for example. Washington, D.C. does as well. But it's traditionally a commercial ordinance where they're tracking and having to report their overall emissions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Karen. Al?
Hi, Amy. Nice to see you. I was very excited to see that you were going to be speaking to our task force, so thank you so much for your time. I have a quick question. Have you seen studies that you might be able to summarize for us on the cost of mixed fuel construction versus the cost of all electric construction?
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize. I know that I normally give a much more basic presentation to task force such as your own, but everyone had told me that Mill Valley knows what they're doing. So I didn't include those slides in my presentation. But I will say that the way the cost effectiveness is an interesting question in general, and there's multiple studies out there, and happy to summarize. They look at all slightly different things, but I will say that the most often cited is the one that's used to support the all of the REACH codes. So that study, which is a statewide study that is funded by the utilities, shows that the cost effectiveness is a universal fact for all electric given certain parameters. And the way that typically works is now that solar is required, currently it's required for all new residential, and the next code cycle will be required for all commercial as well. That simple fact starts to make electrification much more cost effective. Plus, you're not having to pay for the infrastructure of the gas itself. And that cost estimate is somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000 per unit to just not have the infrastructure. That's usually the estimated cost. There are variables depending on which study you're looking at, but that's the biggest overall cost savings from going to all electric. There's ways to make it all electric through other nuances, but that's the Cliff Notes version.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the task force? And Danielle, we don't have any members of the public. Is that correct? Just wanted to check on that again.
We do. We have 5 attendees. So I'm thinking if we just can keep it to questions, that's okay. And then maybe we'll give the opportunity. We'll have to look at time. We could potentially open it up after Brian for questions.
Okay, sounds good. It looks like Urban and Greg have questions. Urban, do you want to go in, and Greg?
Actually, Greg was before me, so Greg, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So one of the things I've noticed as I've walked around Mill Valley recently is that, people have been eating outside a lot more through the pandemic, especially, and the more people eat outside, the more gas heaters are being used and gas fire pits. And, I don't see a lot of, I know that's not really, it's not residential, it's not a commercial building, it's retail. But how do we track and how do we control that? Because it seems like the nitrous oxide that's coming from gas burning constantly, and those things are running from the minute somebody opens till they close. And it seems to be becoming more and more frequent. How do we get some control over that without upsetting the cart?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, often those portables units are actually using propane and not natural gas necessarily, but if they're a fixed fireplace outdoors, for example, might be natural gas. Regardless, it is a little tricky, and existing buildings are harder universally, no doubt about it. But what I will say is that there are very few technologies for which there are not good electric alternatives, and electric alternatives exist for all of the things you just listed. So that is one potential approach, is looking at upgrading. I mean, the good news is propane releases much less greenhouse gas than natural gas, and it doesn't have the leaking potential of other emissions that come with the infrastructure that pipes our gas to us. So I would say that it's something to consider, and it's not the biggest chunk of your overall emissions at this time.
So the propane isn't a bad thing, but a lot of people are putting in fire pits, and I see that a lot in projects, that multifamily projects, and those are natural gas because the infrastructure is going in. But when someone is going all electric, those are just going to be, I mean, when those codes come in, those are going to go away, right? Is that the case, or is there an exception for things that aren't in a building or in a unit or within a home?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And to be clear, I didn't say the propane wasn't bad. I just said it was less bad. But it depends on how the code is written, ultimately, how much of what is regulated. So for those cities that are going with a gas moratorium, no piping can go in, period. And therefore, those new construction applications that would have used gas previously cannot.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I had two really quick questions. So you showed that one barrier quality management chart. So do I understand correctly that 2027, no gas water heaters is likely to be kind of Bay Area standard?
So to be determined. This is an open dialogue. In fact, they have an open public comment period right now for those proposed standards. So it's something that is being evaluated at this time.
Okay, and that would include sort of like, you can't, if your gas heater burns out, you basically would have to replace it with electric. Is that what you're?
That's correct. Yeah. And to be clear, the 2027 date was for water heating, because water heating technology is a little bit in advance of everything else. The heat pump water heater, which is what we're seeing right now, is just, it's been around for a long time and it's extremely efficient. The heating and the space heating technology is a little bit further out.
Great. And can you give us just like a thumbnail on any state regulations that are coming down that might also kind of do some of the heavy lifting for us in terms of phasing out any new sales of gas appliances that you're aware of?
Yeah, so that would be the Air Resources Board if they were able to do so. And they have multiple scenarios right now and a very broad window of, I think, 15 years of when that might occur. So there's nothing has been approved at this point. It is all open discussion. Okay.
And then my last question is that pie chart that Karen was asking a question about with the 52 cities. That was referenced in the staff report, I think, also on page 6. And that's the list of, if anybody wants to figure out which of those 52 cities are, that's the Sierra Club list. Is that correct?
So the Sierra Club and the Building Decarbonization Coalition have we co-list in different formats, but yes.
If anybody wants to look and see who are those 52 cities, they can basically click on that link. That's for the Sierra Club, correct? Okay, and just so everybody knows, Mill Valley is on that list. Just so you know, you're one of those 52 cities. So good job, Mill Valley.
Good job. Yeah, you are currently in the yellow column of the electric preferred, to be clear.
Fiona.
Amy, you mentioned the emissions limits on appliances. Is that in commercial buildings specifically, or does that account for like all of the buildings? And
right. So again, none of those emissions limits have been approved by anyone. They're in discussion right now, but if approved as proposed, it would be universal but phased in over time, get to address different types of equipment types.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Fiona. Any other questions for Amy? Great. Thank you, Amy, for your time. Really appreciate the presentation. And then Danielle, are we ready to move on to Brian?
Yeah, I'm going to let Brian speak. And Clayton, I do see that your hand is up. I'm just trying to get through the speakers, and then because we can then circle back on if it's a question to open it up just for questions. We're going to get to public open time as part of the discussion item that follows the presentation. So with that, Brian.
Hey everyone, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with the slide deck here. And let me know if you see the version that doesn't have my notes. It says I'm sharing. Do you all see my slide deck? Uh-oh.
Yeah. Looks good.
Okay, good. It says that my Zoom quit unexpectedly, so I get off, sorry. Okay, can you guys see my slide deck and hear me?
Yes, all good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Weird note that I got there from Zoom. Okay, so wow, I think everything that Christine and Danielle and Amy had explained, I got a lot of that in my slide deck, so I'll kind of zoom through those. And especially happy to have Amy on. I use a lot of building decarbs networks, coalitions, resources to really inform myself. So it was a really great presentation. And I was going to go over a lot of sort of the state trends, but I think Amy just pretty much nailed it. So thank you for covering that in for me. So I'm with the County of Marin. I'm a sustainability planner. And if a lot of you knew Alice Zandmiller, I replaced her position and I started about 6 months ago. And today the request is to talk about our green building updates at the county level and local level. In addition to looking at our fuel switching programs, update on the REACH codes, and also our low carbon concrete ordinance update. All right, so next. You've seen this pie chart many a times. But this is countywide emissions at 1.4 million metric tons.
It didn't advance.
And the point here is that it did not advance. Oops.
No. Still on your title slide.
Still on the title slide, interesting. Okay. How about now?
No, title slide.
Okay, I'm gonna reset this. Sorry, everyone. This is not working out for me.
Maybe that was your weird Zoom note.
That was the. Oh boy. Okay.
You're showing up twice, Brian. There's one of you without video and one of you with. You're showing up twice in the gallery. There's one of you with video and one of you out.
Yeah, the second one's an audio that I have to run because my computer's funny. So sorry, a lot of technical loopholes I have to pull off from my home office. So let me see, give me just a second. Let me see if I can pull this off. Do this. I will take myself off of, okay, it's giving me the same issue with Zoom. Okay. Can you do me a favor? Can I send this?
Yeah, why don't you email it to me and I will.
That's about to do.
Share it. Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you, everyone. And who was that to you, Danielle?
Yes.
Okay. Some massive problems here technically. Excuse me, everyone. I don't know what's going on. Oh boy.
Debbie, there's a note from Amy about letting the public ask their question if we want.
That might be good. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, I know, Amy, did you need to leave at 7?
I can hang out for a couple of minutes afterwards, but certainly I was hoping to see Brian's presentation.
Okay.
Daniela,
Yeah.
here's your, or sorry, yeah, Daniela, I just sent it over to you.
So maybe if we have 1 minute due to the delay, if there's anyone in attendance from the public that has a specific question for Amy and her presentation, we could take that now. We could take at least one question right now.
Clayton, I just unmuted you. I think if you unmute yourself, you we can give you a chance to talk.
You there, Clayton?
Yeah, I don't have a question for Amy. I was waiting for your open time.
Oh, okay. All right. So I haven't received it yet. Brian, I don't know if you want to try, we could see the presentation with your notes, but if maybe you wanted to do your presentation without looking at your notes on screen.
Yeah, that's fine.
Try that. And not do slideshow mode, and that might work.
Okay. Okay. Sure.
And I'll keep checking my email, but I don't see it yet.
Right, just delayed. Can you see the main slide deck without the notes?
Yeah, like before, I can see the title without notes right now. Do you want to try and advance?
And is it advanced?
It just advancing? Yes.
Whew. Okay. Sorry for that awkward delay, everyone. Okay, I'm gonna breeze through this. Point being, building energy makes up the second biggest chunk of operational carbon emissions within countywide. Same trend as we saw there with Mill Valley, and natural gas makes up 27% if it was its own sector. So here is just sort of giving us a sense of scale and composition. So for scale, in 2005, the emissions was about 777,000 metric tons of CO2. And that's everyone's baseline in Marin, pretty much. And so natural gas made up the biggest chunk compared to electricity. And as we know, with MCE and decarbonizing our grid statewide and locally, we see that share shrink to 20%, where natural gas makes up 80%. So that makes the case for electrifying, and it's critical to decarbonizing our buildings. For composition, you know, yes, it makes a bigger chunk, but it's still, we shrunk our emissions for a lot of reasons, and as Christine explained earlier on the slides, those reasons. All right, so I looked at your MV24 cap and general plan and just sort of gleaned some of the language and ordinance that you probably all are familiar with in terms of conserving energy and encouraging use of solar and so EV and encouraging EV and solar readiness, and that's CL measure 1.5. Specifically on those energy reduction measures, a lot of what I saw was going above and beyond Title 24 for new and existing residential. And we see that trend, and you as well as us in the countywide have done that. You've identified implementing municipal energy and renewable projects, and utilizing incentives and financing programs for existing residential. And one thing that is on the table these days and not explicit in your cap, at least what I've seen, is going all electric, particularly for new construction. Other things as I wanted related to beyond operational carbon was green purchasing for materials. So usually this gets at addressing emissions for the value chain of things that we procure. And the predominant emissions when it comes to things that we procure as city government is usually concrete and cement. I am not terribly familiar, and nor do I will presume that Mill Valley doesn't have too many infrastructure projects going on in terms of laying concrete. But I will just wanted to glean that from your general plan to kind of align what we have going on at the county level. All right, so first there was a request to get an update from the programs we have here locally, and two of them are Electrify Marin and Marin. So here, Electrify Marin, I think some of you have seen this before, but basically it's there as appliance rebates to replace gas appliances with high efficiency electric units, particularly focusing on those more energy hogs, such as space heating and water heating, as well as cooking appliances. So that's available to all homeowners in all of Marin, not just unincorporated. And it also includes higher incentives for income qualified participants. So rebates range usually from about $250 to $1,000, and for income qualified, it goes up to upwards of $2,000. So what are the impacts in terms of the measures that we have of those rebates that the county administers? Well, here's sort of a table breakdown, and at the top you have the appliance induction range and cooktop. That makes up about 36% between January and September 2021. Makes up about 36 of rebates taken advantage of. And then when it comes to water heating and space heating, 60, there's what about 120, 170, 180 program incentives and rebates dished out. We know that when these appliances have to be installed, sometimes it requires a panel upgrade, which can be quite costly. So there are also rebates and incentives for upgrading the service panel. We refer to as a service panel upgrade kicker. The person who runs this program wants to be clear that only you get the service panel upgrade kicker if you are switching your appliance to electric, not simply because you need to upgrade your panel for whatever reason. Okay, so the lessons that we learned thus far from implementing these programs is that homeowners like that they can reduce emissions without big lifestyle changes. So with electric, they're finding high level of satisfaction with new appliances. I personally got an all electric single hob stove and we just love it. It's amazing to cook with. And we're finding that most homeowners want to do further upgrades beyond what they're required, or they don't even have projects that trigger building codes, so they want to do something. And we're finding more and more that contractors are being more supportive than ever, promoting this to their clients. The second program is Marin. And so these are rebates for home energy efficiency improvements. And those rebates, depending on the scope of work, can be upwards to $5,000. There's no cost to, it's basically technical support for home energy advisors, which comes at no cost. And I included a link to the current rebate measures list. There's a lot of measures there that you can access. Another program for Marin is funded by the Department of Energy, home energy scores, where homeowners can get a professional energy evaluation to assess your score. And there's rebates available, $200 for each score that's in the Bay Red territory, which includes Marin County. Basically, this rating is a 1 to 10 rating indicating how efficient your home is. And after they take that score, they can make customized recommendations for those improvements. And it also connects to what I previously talked about, to those Home Plus rebate measures. Again, it was developed by the Department of Energy, and it's a good step for people who just want to get started. Again, there's a link and phone number there in the slide deck you all can access later. There are toolkits available that are free, and they're free energy efficiency toolkits. So they include kits such as LED light bulbs for Marin residences, Marin County residences, faucet aerators and low flow shower heads, and smart power strips. And then Rising Sun, which you all may be familiar with, Center has opportunity for greenhouse calls, so they can deliver those kits and provide, at this point during the pandemic, remote assistance with installation. And there's a link and phone number there as well. So there is one more program called Bay Area Multifamily Building Enhancements. So this is for multifamily. So residences, and there's rebates and no cost consulting for multifamily property improvements, and includes rebates from heating and water systems to gas to electric conversions, lighting appliances, air sealing installations, and more. So it's just not the space and water heating and cooking appliances. So there's more program details that you have to be eligible, qualify for. So you have to have about 5 to 100 unit buildings. And the upgrades are meant to reduce total energy use by less 15%. And those rebates are about $750. I'll move forward, but the upside of this is contact Kellen, who's our team member, and there's his contact information. He runs a lot of the Bay Area programs. And last thing is you need to know, as a big takeaway, whether electrify Marin and Bay Area, you can stack the rebates and incentives so they don't exclude each other. So there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of incentives and rebates out there to take advantage of. Okay, so here's the policy update to our REACH codes, and Amy covered a lot of it, and she nailed all of it. Excuse me, the child is a little crying. Okay, so here's a rundown of our current REACH codes across the 12 jurisdictions in Marin County. And they vary, and this includes unincorporated Marin County up top. So in the blue, we have ours as well as yours, Mill Valley, and San Anselmo at Cal Green Tier 1. And that drives to go beyond state code. So in addition, I think it's important to know that we have enhanced energy efficiency requirements while also targeting GHG emission reductions by offering that electric preferred pathway to going all electric. So yeah, we're right up top and we're being the most aggressive. For the green section there, we have Novato, San Rafael, Tiburon, and Fairfax that they go beyond state code. And Novato and San Rafael have enhanced energy efficiency requirements, but don't target the GHG savings via the electric preferred. With Tiburon and Fairfax, they decided to go Cal Green Tier 1. Again, Cal Green Tier 1 are building codes with a variety of other measures, not just energy efficiency requirements. For Tiburon and Fairfax, they opted to exclude energy efficiency requirements. So that's an interesting note. As Amy mentioned, Fairfax did go all electric, and that goes into effect March of 2022. But still, they don't have yet any energy efficiency requirements. Lastly, in the gray bucket there, we have Belvedere, Corte Madera, Larkspur, Ross, and Sausalito. They didn't adopt any REACH codes last code cycle, so they're meeting the minimum state code standards, Title 24. There's still great standards if you're comparing to the rest of the nation, but for California, it's okay, it's good. So note Sausalito has indicated and I think I saw it in your minutes or in your assessment that you talked to Mark Palmer, or someone did, and Sausalito has indicated that they are considering to go all electric for new construction during the next code cycle, as well as adding additional energy efficiency requirements. Not a done deal, but they're looking into that. So what's happening across the state? A lot of this, Amy already mentioned, you already had a deep discussion on, but in a nutshell, the state will defer. We were anticipating that the state would go all electric by this upcoming code cycle 2022, but they are going to defer and will likely do it the following code cycle. Nonetheless, we feel it's prudent to get ahead of it, especially as Amy mentioned, their BACMID is looking to regulate NOx, and there's a wide range of timelines when that may happen. So that it could effectively eliminate some of the major, the gas appliances. For California jurisdictions, they're all trending towards all electric, again, as Amy mentioned, particularly for new construction. And as I said, Fairfax is the only jurisdiction within Marin County that has done that thus far. Some learn lessons, and I think it's important to understand what particularly learn lessons when adopting all electric. We can learn from other jurisdictions, and there's 3 particular jurisdictions that have been sued by developers and trade groups. One won their suit, that's Berkeley. One in process with a judge favoring the city, I believe that's Santa Rosa, and one walked back their all electric ordinance, which was Windsor. So it's sort of a mixed bag of what will happen. We don't anticipate any litigation. Again, particularly as the region as well as the state is trending towards all electric anyways. And sentiments from the community stakeholders, we found certainly that environmental advocates want us to be super aggressive when it comes to our building codes. However, in the development community, particular Marin Builders Association has expressed concern over going all electric. And some of you may know that already. All right, so moving forward. So for our next code update, here's sort of what we're thinking for Marin County, for the County of Marin. And here's just some options for our next code update is requiring all electric only for new construction. And again, Fairfax has already adopted. Some other option is continuing that electric preferred requirement with enhanced energy efficiency requirements. And then there is the other option of just not looking at so those top 2 look at the whole building. This third block here kind of looks only at appliances for certain end uses. So that's another option. And particularly you want to target water heating and space heating. I think the last block there is important, which is critical, I think, other than just for new construction, is developing an energy REIT code for models and for remodels and additions, not just new construction. So that is different, that is new. And as Amy had mentioned, there was cost effectiveness is key to that. Now, through some of the state's energy code or energy tools, we can determine relatively easily if we can make remodels and additions have energy reach codes using cost effectiveness, and it's proving to be cost effective. So next code cycle, in addition to all electric, we are looking at having reach codes for remodels and additions to existing residential. So those are sort of the highlighted policy code options. There's much more. I just wanted to bucket into those 4 main things. So similar to the last code cycle, what we did at Marin County, I think Alice Zanmiller was here at the time doing it, is we engaged all planners from all jurisdictions as led by the county to essentially develop and discuss what a updated code could look like. And so here's sort of our timeline to engagement and code development. So we're going to begin with stakeholder outreach, whether internal or external to public agencies and local governments, starting in 2022. between February and July of 2022, we'll have monthly meetings with MCEP stakeholders, that is our counterparts across all jurisdictions, to really update everyone and give details similar to Amy Ryder's information to all jurisdictions, so we can best inform ourselves on what a code update could look like. For the county, between August and November of next year, we're looking to update that code. And ideally, what we'd like to do is, as best as possible, I know this is not practical, to align all jurisdictions with their code. I know Mill Valley has aligned with the county as well as with San Anselmo in that green bucket I presented earlier. So we're hoping everyone can align, because what that does is we are trying to be as best possible considerate to the development community. As you saw, there's a variety of codes. I just can't imagine the confusion everyone gets as they're working across these jurisdictions and working with such a variety of checklists, as it were. So that's between August and November, ideally adopting or drafting that code, and then adopting it October, November of next year. And that's for the county, and hopefully we would like to impart upon all the other jurisdictions to also do that as well, because that aligns with the update of the 2022 code cycle. In December, it's important that we all submit our cost effectiveness study and sort of our everything that we developed, our code, to the CEC for approval. And that 2022 code development will take effect January 2023. So that's sort of our timeline for code development. And the ask from Mill Valley, as well as other jurisdictions, is to engage starting in February and July, when we meet with other stakeholders to consider what a green building code update could look like across the county. All right, lastly, I'll finish up with our policy update to our low carbon concrete. Just sort of to start from a basic level. So what's missing sort of here in this pie chart? Well, what's missing is, well, what is here is operational carbon. What's missing is the embodied carbon. So typically, us jurisdictions and local governments, not only here, but globally, do GHG inventories, and it's just within our geographical boundaries. But what we forget is our opportunity to impact emissions across the things that we consume across the supply chain. So to the right, you have the picture there of basically what's we see happen every day as we look out into the ocean across the bay. And I think this graphic hopefully illustrates the importance of embodied carbon and sort of this missed opportunity of emissions reduction impact. So in our typical codes, such as green building codes, we have sort of this standard emission trend occurring over the 20 years operation of a building after it's built. And then we make it more efficient through building codes, and then we can reduce that over time. And then if we go net zero, then we can really just go zero in terms of operational carbon. But we forget about what came the first 1 or 2 years to develop that during construction, which is all this embodied carbon. So in fact, that is just embodied from construction all the way to the next 20 years it's operating. And so, as you all may know that the county passed a low carbon concrete ordinance. And the point was that we wanted to identify the most carbon intense material and be the first out the gates to prove a concept of what a low carbon concrete ordinance could be. So we know that we don't pour a lot of concrete here in Marin County, but the point was that through a grant with the Air District and working with our regional partners, we wanted to be able to develop a model code so that it can scale to other cities. And so the reason here, if you see this supply chain of concrete, it's basically going all the way from mining all the way to the end use of life. The most carbon intense part is from the cracking or the heating of cement, and as well as the chemical reaction occurs when it's formed, releasing a lot of CO2. So that's where a lot of the carbon emissions occur. And the use of it is us here. And if we can affect policy in this number 5 here, we can actually affect everything in number 4, 3, and 2, and driving, and even 1, in the way the materials that are used, how it's manufactured, to how they mix it on site in our county. So that's what we do. In terms of the update, due to the pandemic, and Alice's departure, we haven't quite implemented and enforced, because it would feel real wrong to start cracking down on people during the pandemic. But it's implementable, not yet implemented. We found that those who've at least applied voluntarily, or not voluntarily, it's on the books, but who have put it so far, they always follow the path of least resistance. So there's 2 pathways, which is reducing the cement within the concrete, or finding alternative materials to lower the carbon emissions within it. And everyone just wants to go to the cement limit because it's really hard to prove, you've reduced this X amount of emissions. Because that latter requires an environmental product declaration, which is a material documentation to say this material that went into forming concrete and your cement has this many emissions. And it's timely and inexpensive. So everyone just goes with a cement limit, which we provided. The other thing we learned is that this challenges our traditional local government. So again, going back to, yes, we're putting a law that affects our boundaries, but that supply chain of concrete goes beyond our boundaries. There's an outsized impact of our emissions opportunity. The other thing that we're learning as we're implementing, and as I've interviewed ever since I've got on 6 months ago, from every player in the provision and pouring of cement, from architects to the people who mix it, the companies who mix it, to the contractors who pour it, is that the design team, it's similar to green building, which are the architects and structural engineers, really drive the change, right? We can regulate sort of the other parts of that, but unless the people who design it, who are the ultimate client to that project, can tell the supply mixers and the contractors that they should pour in less cement or do something specific to cement, they're the ones that drive that change. So that's one of our important lessons learned.
Hey, Brian.
Some of the solutions, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, sorry to interrupt you. Are you close to the end of your presentation? We are just,
yes.
We're running a little bit long on time.
Sure, these are the last 2 slides. Is that okay? I can jump to the end. All right, so some of the solutions for that concrete ordinance is we need an implementation and plan strategy, and so that's what I'm developing now. We have to, as with anything, simplify language and code, especially for public-facing sites. And this code affects everyone from specifiers, everyone in the private industry, specifiers, the ready-mix suppliers, the contractors, even the governmental actors such as our inspectors. If we don't simplify that language, which we need to improve on, then everyone's just confused. Implementing the findings, so when we implement our findings, we have to do that with all the stakeholders along the value chain that I just mentioned. And then we also have to streamline our compliance forms and processes. Right now we have that out there, and I think you all have links to it in your materials, but those need to be improved dramatically. And that's what I'm working on right now. Lastly, neighboring counties and cities are starting to adopt or looking at low carbon concrete ordinances. So Marin modeled it, and we're modeling the implementation solutions we're continuing to share out. Right now, myself, as well as other counterparts across the Bay, are initiating working groups that not only include local governments, but also architects, structural engineers, contractors, developers, to really address this idea of low carbon concrete, but not only that, low carbon materials. So anything that goes into the building, just not concrete. So more cities have already, and more are considering putting low carbon concrete ordinances or just low carbon embodied carbon materials in their climate action plans. And we're finding, again, Everyone's finding that government truly can play a role here to push the industry to move forward. So I'll end there, and thank you for the time, everyone, and sorry about the snafu in the beginning there. Appreciate your patience.
Thanks so much, Brian. Yeah, no problem. I think we've all had a situation like that before, so we empathize. We have a question from the task force, Al.
Thank you, Brian. A couple quick questions. Sure. First is in connection with electric water heaters and space heaters compared to natural gas. Is there data that the county communicates as part of the Electrify Marin program on the cost of operation of the electric versions versus the natural gas ones? That's the first question. And then the second question relates to the multifamily program. Just wanted to know to what extent participation's been impacted by the fact that most residents are the ones who pay for the actual energy bills. So owners might not necessarily have an incentive to upgrade, even if there are incentives from the county.
Sorry, can you repeat the first one? I kind of missed that first one there.
Yeah, it's just a quick question about the projected cost of operation of the electric versions of water heating and space heating appliances versus their natural gas counterparts. I've heard a lot about how heat pump technology is much more energy efficient than combustion of natural gas, but I was wondering if the county communicates that through any sort of data or studies to the community.
No, we don't have any studies that communicate, well, specific studies, other than what the state provides or organizations like Building Decarb Network provides. And sorry, and then the second question was?
Just in connection with the multifamily program, have you seen a significant uptake of that program by building owners? Building owners tend not to have an incentive when their residents are the ones paying the energy bills. They don't necessarily have an incentive to upgrade their space and water heating infrastructure.
And when you said if residences are the ones paying their bills, I'm just writing this down so I can understand your question. Okay, so in terms of the multifamily program, are you referring to existing or new development, new construction?
I'm referring to the Bay Area multifamily building.
Oh, that one. Sorry. Yeah, I'll have to ask that question to Kellen, who has more information on that program. So I can't answer that for you right now. Sorry, Al. But I will make sure I pose that question to Kellen, and I'll have him get back to you all.
That sounds great. And it sounded like Amy might have an answer to the first question about cost of operation.
Yes, please.
Yeah, happy to take that one if you're okay with it. So the most comprehensive study to date on existing building operations, if you electrify, which of course doesn't include the cost savings from construction, is a company called E3 that conducted it. And that study shows that across the board, for most people, it saves money, roughly $100 a month. There is a potential, or I'm sorry, not $100 a month, $100 a year. That's an important clarification. There is the potential when you're switching your furnace out for a heat pump, because that technology has air conditioning built in for a building that didn't have air conditioning previously, that could result in higher overall bills because you're now using a service you didn't previously have. But overall, it's much more efficient. So for the most part, you're talking and it's a range of, a difference of $100 a year, one way or another, roughly. If you're adding solar, it's bigger savings. But those are the numbers that I can recall off the top of my head.
Great, thanks, Amy.
Sure.
Urban.
Yeah, hi, Brian or Amy, maybe both. So you mentioned 3 cities with litigation, Berkeley, Windsor, and there was a third one. Are those the 3 cities that have tried to push the, the boundaries on pushing electrification for the existing building stock?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so the 3 different cities, the city of Berkeley was the first ever to do a gas moratorium. They were sued in federal court, and they won, but it's under appeal as of right now. So they're a little bit of a different circumstance. And then the 2 others were sued by the same developer. So the town of Windsor and the city of Santa Rosa. The town of Windsor did not have the financial resources to fight it. So they actually ended up withdrawing from their REACH code to do so. Their ordinance was exactly the same as the city of Santa Rosa, who has won theirs, but are also under appeal. So very different lawsuits, but very similar approaches, all under all electric or under the gas moratorium.
So that was all electric for new or for
new construction only. None of this has to do with existing building.
So has anybody pushed the boundaries on existing building stock? And has there been any resulting litigation, as one can imagine?
No resulting litigation because no one's done it yet. So okay. we have a couple of cities that have adopted existing building ordinances. They're all fairly new. The most recent was a conversation that, as far as I know, didn't actually finish at Half Moon Bay last night, so many cities are looking at this right now.
So can you just name a few that are looking at that?
Specifically, who's talking about it in public? Let's see. So Half Moon Bay is having active conversations right now. There are a couple of ordinances that have been passed. For example, the city of Encinitas in San Diego County has an ordinance that is all proven to be cost effective, that gives you a point-based system for existing buildings that includes electrification as elements, as options on that list of menus. So there's a couple of different approaches that are out there, and folks are experimenting right now with what that looks like.
Okay, great. And then last question for either of you. What's the sort of the flavor of the conversation at the county level in Marin about approaching this topic in a future code cycle? Is there any appetite for taking this up or not?
All electric?
Yeah, for existing.
Yes, there is. So yeah, for existing.
For existing, not new, for existing. Like most buildings have already been built, right? I mean,
I know.
Most are already there. So yeah, I'm just curious. Like, is there any discussion going on here or not?
It's a good question, and Amy, maybe you want to chime in on this distinction. Is one thing I tried to maybe discuss was this idea of substantial remodel. I know Petaluma has a substantial remodel definition, which sort of lowers the threshold of what they consider new construction. So it's almost, I think it's like 50% can get, if there's 50% or more altered to remodel, to the substantial remodel, then it'll trigger all electric. So there's that, like sort of new ones.
Already.
Yeah, you have a 50%, right, as new construction.
We do that already. Yeah, everybody who does a remodel in our city has to go and reach current code.
Exactly. Yeah. So I know that for the county, at least, unincorporated, to save confusion, we stuck to our new construction definition, which is 75% of linear wall space. Yeah. So I know I tried to broach redoing that, and it was told by our chief building official and CDA, like, let's not do that.
So that part of the code sounds like it's a ways out, right? Nobody has done it yet, and this is not something which is being discussed at the county level, at least.
No, but what we are discussing, Amy mentioned, is for Encinitas, they're doing that flexible measure system. Is that what you were referring to, Amy? That point system, which we think is really good, a really good model ordinance that can prove cost effectiveness, and we're thinking about that for additions and alterations and remodels of existing as well.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Urban, just a quick note, the county's cap says the following. Consider adopting an ordinance in 2024 that requires homeowners to replace natural gas appliances, such as, you know, all the ones we're talking about, at time of replacement where feasible. So I think it's fair to say that they're having the conversation because they put it in the cap.
Right.
So that's
and we just
placement on burnout is where they're looking to have their point.
Correct. We still have to evaluate that. We did, because of capacity constraints, we did actually get somewhat an intern from from UCSB to look at evaluating whether we can go time of sale, time of burnout.
Greg.
Thank you. So Brian, I just, you know, so much as chair of the planning commission, so much of what we don't really have open land with new construction. So pretty much everything is a major remodel. And so it seems kind of a natural place to, if somebody's doing a major remodel and they're putting in a whole new mechanical system, why would that be so controversial to require it to go all electric at that point? Because for us, it's almost like new construction, since, you know, like Urban said, if it's over 50%, and even when it's not up to 50%, so many of the just under 50% demo are really pretty major renovations. They're adding a new story. They're putting in all new kitchen, all new appliances, all new utility connections, panel upgrades. It just seems like, why is that one so controversial when it's a whole new system and it would save them money in the long run? And then, you know, those things are going to be sitting there for 20 years and nobody's going to want to replace something that was brand new.
Yeah, I wonder why that would be controversial too. What we need to do better as local government actors is to ensure that we're communicating these things simply. It's so complicated that I even find myself in a loop, and I think Amy probably articulates it the best, but you know, it shouldn't be controversial. Like you said, like the cost effectiveness proves out, savings and everything that you mentioned. It aligns with the progressiveness environmentally with Marin County, and we just go on and on and on. I agree. And I know from a county perspective, we are leaning towards, and we want to present options to our board of supervisors, but we are leaning towards recommending going to all electric, at least for new construction. In terms of going existing, yeah, that's a challenge one. I think we'll, as I mentioned before, go with this flexible measure system. But I agree with you, Greg.
In the interest of time, yeah, I think we should do.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we have any other questions from the task force. I don't know if we have any from the general public or if we have time for that, but if there was one specific for Brian or Amy.
I think I was waiting for public open time, so I think if we need to hit the next section quickly. But thank you to Brian and Amy for your presentations. They're very informative and helpful, I think, for tonight's discussion.
Thanks so much. Okay, we're going to move along to the presentation from the subcommittee that we established last meeting. And Danielle's going to share. Susan will be presenting with some support from the subcommittee members. And this will be a bulk. I would just ask that we're going to have everyone hold any specific questions till the end so that we can get through all of this.
All right, shall I jump in? Yeah.
All yours.
Okay, can you hear me, Debbie?
Yes, yes, you're good.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Well, thank you. And yeah, I'll try to zoom along in the interest of time and try to leave time at the end for us. I want to maybe, do you mind backing up to the top slide, Danielle? I know we're trying to zip, but I wanted to make a point there on the title slide. The original section was called something along the lines of renewable energy and energy efficiency. When we looked at this as a subcommittee, we started getting into a broader scope of what does it really take to decarbonize buildings? And this is the one part of the CAP that will look at buildings holistically. So we recommend, as our first recommendation as part of this, that we rename this section to building decarbonization and renewable energy. So we can consider that. Okay, next slide. As we said, as Al, Greg, and myself, and going into the third slide, we looked at CAP studies and stuff, ordinances from a lot of neighboring towns: Sausalito, Berkeley, Mountain View, Larkspur, Fairfax, San Anselmo. Had a number of meetings with folks, our counterparts in those jurisdictions. You got to hear a lot about what's happening there. So the other thing I want to note here is equity, that we really wanted to make sure we considered equity in our recommendations and had some conversations with our counterparts along those lines. And you'll see that coming out when we get into some of the specifics later. And the other thing before diving in, my focus is mainly going to be on the why and the what. Like, why do we think these are the right things to do, and what are we talking about doing? A little bit less so on the how. So, you know, I mean, I'm by no means an expert around the REACH code and Cal Tier 1 or 2 or whatever. I don't know all the details there, but you know, we're trying to sort out what we think are the priority areas, and there will be time to get into the specifics of how that would actually take place. So that's a starting point. And then back to you, Debbie, for the next slide. And you can go on, Danielle.
Yeah, so just a reminder for the group tonight that we're not making any decisions or taking any actions tonight based on the presentation. This is really just for discussion. The supporting document was what was sent out, and so we tried to pull together as much of a summary as possible to make it a little more palatable for the group. It is highly technical. There's a lot of information here. I know that Susan's going to try and get through things very quickly. This is an amazing subcommittee, super enthusiastic, and I think you'll see that reflected in the amount of content and the care and feeding they gave over the past few weeks. So we will be listening closely to questions and feedback. That'll be really important. But thank you, subcommittee, for putting all of this together. It's great. All right, let's just continue.
Yeah, sounds good. So summary side, we're going to cover 3 major sections. So renewable energy and electrification are key, energy efficiency, of course, and then a new section that is actually not something that we saw in a lot of the other climate action plans around building materials. So this is an opportunity for Mill Valley to be a leader. We heard, Brian did a nice job describing what embodied carbon is and why that matters with regards to concrete. There's other aspects of materials that we think are important. So you'll see that come up as well. Into renewable energy and electrification, and we can jump right in. This is the slide where I probably will talk the most, and it reflects a lot of what we just heard. And granted, I hadn't heard Amy and Brian's presentation either. So, you know, some of this is new to me in terms of what the context that we're operating in it is. But nonetheless, we definitely heard how important electrification is as far as meeting climate goals, what it is, substituting gas appliances with their electric equivalents, which are cleaner, safer, very efficient, you know, often cheaper to use, especially when you combine it with things like solar and storage on site. So, and then we got into new construction, major remodels, what that looks like, and then versus existing building stock. And when it comes to new construction and major remodels, we recommend that we move forward with an ordinance that would require that going all electric. And I know we just had discussions about this, so I'm not going to try to reflect back. Should we change that? I'm just going to kind of, as of earlier today, this is where we felt we should go. And again, we're kind of saying if we're trying to really go for it in terms of climate and the urgency and time frame that we have to solve this, this is what we would need to do. Secondly, looking at phasing replacement, which there are two sort of major replacement scenarios. One is a planned replacement where, hey, someday I think I want to get a new stove or a new dryer, or, you know, that furnace is just making some sounds. I need to do something about it. Time is on your side in that situation. It makes it a lot easier and more feasible to plan ahead and get that worked out. That's something that we think is very, very within reach for people to do outside of the funding support for that, which we'll get into in some cases. But the unplanned replacement is where the rubber really meets the road, because the water heater just died. You've got to replace it today, or you're going to face cold showers for the next 2 weeks or longer. What are you going to do? So we want to make sure we educate people and provide pathways to get electric ready, so that people are, even if they're not going to do it today, they're going to be ready to do it, so that when the time comes, they're not going to have to keep gas because they don't have a really good alternative. So I hope that's clear how I'm explaining that. So this whole thing of phasing and creating a lot of education and awareness will be really critical to helping us make that transition, creating pathways. The next slide so the next slide is basically saying, in order to really do that, we think we need to go deeper, and we would propose that ourselves or some others, or however, you know, we continue to work on this so that we have a more specific plan that would allow us to look at our whole building stock and what it will take to facilitate those transitions, and what kind of resources can we bring to bear to help our community do that, and you know, what external partners would be able to help us with that transition. And the next slide then gets into more specifics around making sure our residents know what's possible. We heard about Electrify Now and Marin, and there's incredible resources available. You can get one-on-one support for free. There's another new program in the South State called Home Ambassadors we can leverage. So we don't have to wait for the county to figure all this out for us. We can be creative in solving our problems. We can take advantage of these resources. And from an equity perspective, we can really make sure that this is accessible to everyone, that we're not creating an electrification divide that leaves some people out, but that we facilitate bringing everybody along in this. That's kind of an overarching equity goal that we want to set for ourselves. Slide 10. So I'll reference the template here, and this is one of those cases. When it comes to our own city buildings, you know, they're a very small part of our building inventory for the city, but they're highly visible and can be important examples and learning opportunities. You know, there's ways to communicate with the public in a municipal building setting that can allow people to see the latest technology in action and so forth. So we want to make sure that we continue to lead on the municipal building front for those reasons, especially. This language that we're proposing and that's in the report is very much template coming out of the baseline Larkspur report that Christine prepared for us. So there should not really be, this is kind of just pass through. This is the kind of standard that we would go for. Same with slide 11. The good news we saw, MCE is really making it much cleaner and cleaner and cleaner in terms of the options that we have. We definitely want to try to help people who want to have on-site renewable generation with solar panels and storage. So we think that some study could be useful there to help create action steps. There's possibilities for campaigns and other things that the city could do to really promote that even further. And the reason for doing the on-site would be resilience. And we'll get into that, I think, in the next slide, which has to do with generators. And we want to create a phased path. Again, this would not be something we would try to enact tomorrow, but you know, over the next number of years, create a path to phase out fossil fuel generators, knowing that they can be very critical for, especially like medical applications or something when power's out. We want to make sure that there are alternatives for people to replace those in a way that will be smooth and easy for them. So that's a key piece. And then the same goes for electrification of landscape equipment. When it comes to appliances that are powered by energy sources, there's electric equivalents for just about everything. So there's no reason to not be able to move towards this. I mean, we will need to provide resources and help and create education awareness so that people can make that shift with us over time. Slide 13. This is, again, kind of goes hand in hand with some of the municipal buildings, but just make sure that we're really leading the, taking advantage of all there's technology is moving very fast in this area, and it's just getting better and better and cheaper. So there's so much opportunity for us to take advantage of that. And we want to make sure that we are fully embracing what's coming down the pipe to us. As we push more demand onto the electric grid, as we move off gas, we will really need to take advantage of all these types of things, especially. And that leads us into energy efficiency, which is the next section. So I'm on slide 15. Like I said, more demand for electricity, more efficiency will be important. So the not that watt that you didn't use, you call it megawatt, negative watt, that's the best thing we can do, reduce before we try to do this other stuff. If we can use less, it makes it all the better.
We're on slide 15, Danielle.
Thank you. So continuing to support state-of-the-art green building is going to be key, and the REACH codes will enable us to help do that to the extent we don't want to go beyond them. And then measures to improve cooling are super important. Of course, as things get warmer, unfortunately, there are ways to adapt that low-tech stuff using lighter colors, using more trees and things like that go actually quite a long way to keeping temperatures more livable. Slide 16, audits. So this is, again, I think some of the sort of more template language, but having this data, you heard some of the energy score stuff. It helps create more rationalized plans for building owners, and it also helps them get ROI from different measures they can take. So they can see what's prioritized, what's prioritized, and get the cost savings from doing that. So those are important to do. And next slide, and maybe we're on different numbers. No, we're same, we're good. This is more recommendations around efficiency, which is just fundamentally are to help residents take full advantage of existing programs to be able to assess what's available to them and be able to finance it. There's a lot of different options here. So I think I'll leave it at that. And then the last section I mentioned, this is new for us and exciting. I think we feel really excited to kind of bring this to you and put it out for discussion and consideration. We talked about how important building materials are for climate, both where the materials are coming from, how they're being used, and then what happens to them after that first life. So some of this relates to, are we going to, we know that forests are super important in terms of carbon sinks, and we know that there's initiatives to plant 1 trillion trees and things like that. If we can preserve the existing forests, especially the super dense tropical rainforest or Northwest rainforest, rather than getting wood from those areas, that's going to be a better choice from a climate perspective. Not saying that we can't use wood, but we can turn towards certification bodies like Forest Stewardship Council, certified wood, so that we're using materials that are thoughtfully harvested. Again, more details about other things related to petroplastics, and that's a whole area that Greg's provided a lot of expertise on. And then, like I said, reusing existing materials, because—
Can you advance it? Okay, sorry, we were not advanced.
Oh, shoot. I'm not following, I'm just looking at my own notes. Reusing existing materials, Urban has talked about, there's organizations that can help to take apart, disassemble historic buildings and others, because there's some perfectly good stuff that can get to be reused that we can include in the process, make that part of our process and incent that behavior. So big picture, we talk about consumption-based emissions and how we can't control quite a lot of them because we can't necessarily dictate, where people are buying clothes from or things like that. but here's a consumption-based inventory that we really can address and control. So we can really steer the choice of materials that are going to be part of our building stock and for decades to come. That's a big piece that we'd like to bring to your consideration. I managed to get through, so I'm going to turn back over to Debbie to talk about next steps and how we want to use the rest of our time.
Bravo, I'm impressed. You flew through that presentation because we needed to. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. There was a lot in there, and hopefully everyone was able to do some pre-reading, so you were able to get a little bit of the background before the presentation came to the group. Al, I think, has a comment to make, or maybe some color to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Susan. That was really thorough and well delivered. I wanted to add a little bit of color to this idea of a phased approach and what that means, specifically as an example in the case of adopting an ordinance to replace natural gas appliances in existing buildings. So I think we heard that lots of jurisdictions are looking at this and talking about it. And so it's definitely a work in progress. And so what did we as a subcommittee think would be a constructive approach for our city, which is also interested in addressing this area? And I think the key is that we settled on adopting a phased approach, which we saw in some other jurisdictions locally as well. We wanted to add a little more teeth to that. And so we're recommending a phased approach with a deadline in place. So in the case of replacing natural gas appliances, phase one might be something where you can still replace electric with natural gas, but in order to do so, you need to watch a 1-hour webinar that gives you all the information you would need if you were so inclined to switch to electric. And we think that that's a valuable transitional strategy. Phase two might be something like replace on burnout, which a lot of jurisdictions are looking at. And then phase three might require a lot more planning. And to create the planning for a wholesale replacement of natural gas, we need to create the capacity to do the additional analysis and development. And we're recommending to do that by just continuing the work of this subcommittee or another working group that is established and then provided with check-ins with city staff and the city council. So that's an overview of the approach that we're taking. We're not looking to be on the leading edge of any of this stuff. We just want to be doing our part as a city to solve these problems.
Thank you, Al. Other questions from task force members with respect to the presentation? Karen, do I see Karen?
I guess some feedback on it, other than that it's fabulous and detailed and all that. I also read through what's happening in Ithaca, and I would like to just comment or ask the subcommittee. I feel like their concept of developing resiliency hubs or resiliency centers, I could see, since we're much smaller, I could see that happening at City Hall and the community center in less than 2030. That's kind of one thought that we need some role models around the city to show what the batteries look like. And again, in the Ithaca study, you all read that they're going to have battery supplies there for when people lose their power. It's a great education tool for the whole city. So that was one thing. The other thing that comes out of reading all this is the committee or the city almost needs a staff person to look for all this money. With what's been passed locally or recently, there's going to be a lot more money available for people as well as municipalities. And I don't know if the city has the resources for that. Those are my comments.
Thanks, Karen. Any other questions from our task force this evening? Al, do you have another one, or is that from your other? Susan, you have a comment?
I was just going to respond to Karen, but I'll defer to Susan if she would like to respond to Karen's comments. Or
oh, thanks. Well, yeah, I was going to kind of build on it, but I'll just, yes, you make a good point, Karen, about why couldn't we do Resilience Hub and Innovation Showcase sooner than 2030 in our town buildings? That seems very reasonable. I'll let you address the city looking for money if that's, or add on that, Al. The other point I wanted to make, we didn't draw this out really strongly, but there are, since you mentioned Ithaca as an example, that we highlighted as the first city in the country who has passed an all-electric retrofit ordinance with 100 million in funding that they've got secured. There are also campaigns that are being done by an organization that are called Solarize campaigns. And those are citywide campaigns, time-bound for 20 weeks. The residents have that amount of time to take advantage. And the more people who buy in, the cheaper the price is. This is just for solar panels, but they're looking at extending that to storage. And I'm talking to them about expanding it to efficiency and electrification. They get 1,000% increase in uptake on panels when they run these campaigns. They're running a lot of them in Connecticut in conjunction with the Connecticut Green Bank, which is one of the many state green banks, and the Build Back Better proposes the National Green Bank. So there's, like Karen's point, there's so many resources that are going to start to want to funnel out into these very sort of micro implementations. So finding ways to create deployment vehicles that we can take advantage of this, and seeing the fact that it's proven that running it in this particular method results in a lot of not just individual building, but as a whole, the whole building stock starts to get upgraded. So there's lots of mechanisms we can use we can take advantage of.
Al, did you say you had a response to Karen's comment?
Yeah, just to elaborate on Ithaca, because it's a very exciting development. So I think in Amy's presentation, when she was talking about what's being done on existing buildings, she said that there's a lot of interest in the near term converging on these emission limits on appliances, but there's also longer term solutions that are of the nature of Ithaca, large scale planned phase outs. And what's very exciting about Ithaca is that when you look at these electrification upgrades of existing natural gas appliances, I think there's an assumption that this is going to cost people money, but one of the studies that backed the Ithaca plan was demonstrating that 60% of the planned replacements are so-called in the money. And what that means is that the replacement, including the full upfront cost, will wind up being an attractive investment relative to leaving the natural gas in place. And that's attributable to the energy efficiency of the new electric appliances. And so what Ithaca is doing that's exciting is that they are sourcing private capital from outside of the owners of these buildings to invest in these attractive electrification projects. And by unleashing that private capital, they're not putting in government money. This is private money, private equity capital that's going to finance the transformation in a way that doesn't burden lower and middle income households. So I think this is a good example of something that we should be investigating, but it's not something that's going to be ready for our adoption of our cap on Earth Day. It's something that we need to create the capacity in the form of a working group that will continue to look into this and pull in the right deployment partners to make this type of a development a reality. But it could be a win-win path. And so we should look at it as something that's worthy of the city's time and attention.
Thanks, Al. I know we were up against our time. I want to give Urban has a question or comment. I don't know. I think we have one person in the public that does. And this was our last agenda item, and our next meeting is December 15th, but I want to be respectful of people's times if anyone has to drop off at 8.
I'll be super quick. I just mostly wanted to thank Susan and Al and Greg for doing all this work. So this is incredibly helpful. I know you guys put a lot of effort into it, so it's very much appreciated. If you're going to pursue this further, I know that you spoke to a lot of people that work in sustainability. My recommendation would be to, if you have the ability, to meet with architects and contractors to kind of get their perspective, because I'm sure they're going to have a point of view on a lot of these things. And then I guess to sort of top down very quickly, my point would be that everyone has seen when it comes to new construction, which in Mill Valley, as Greg has pointed out, includes substantial remodels, because that's basically what we do. That Mill Valley is already in the top blue tier together with the county and San Anselmo. And the county is continuing to push that. And I think that's probably a good path forward for us. The next step then, or the next category then, is existing. And what we heard is that there's a lot of talk, but there hasn't been a lot of sort of like city action in terms of like laws or ordinances on that level. I think the main thing, and I think Al, you referred to this, is what I called last time we talked, the green nudges. I think there's a lot that can be done here, and I think that's really very, very essential here, because somebody comes in and they want to replace their water heater or their furnace, they have to get a permit. So they come into City Hall. That is an ideal opportunity to give them information that might persuade them to go electric voluntarily. For example, did you know that your gas stove emits dangerous gases into your household that affect, for example, your children, right, their health? So there's a lot of good information that we can give people that will encourage them, including cost, which I know that you were asking about tonight, to go electric voluntarily. And I think that's probably going to be the path that we can take here. And I think there's a lot of value in cooperating with our partners around the county to get those messages crafted and to get those messages out to people. And I think that's going to be very, very effective. Next point I really wanted to make is that I love your idea about looking at materials. I think that's a really important thing. There's a lot of work that's being done with replacing, for example, steel, as Greg will know, with sustainable wood, right? So, and when they look at the life cycle, environmental impact of using sustainable wood and in replacing steel in large buildings, and we're talking about like multi-story buildings, it's very favorable. And I think there's a lot of good information, a lot of good potential there. And this is happening already. They're already doing this in green buildings. So there's a lot to be done there. And I love the fact that you guys have brought that up. And I think the final point I want to make is this whole notion of landscaping equipment, especially blowers, is something that we absolutely have to get to the bottom of. I think that's low hanging fruit. That stuff pollutes like crazy. It is very bad from an equity standpoint. People who use this obviously are lower income, and they are subjected to substantial noise and other health impacts. And a number of cities around Marin have passed bans, but none of them have been enforced. And I think there's a lot that can be done here to actually get everybody working together to actually make this a 12 jurisdiction ban that's enforced, communicate that out to contractors, put together the right incentives, and actually get this thing done. I think that would be really very significant. So I think that's something else that needs to be part of this plan. It's something that I'm working on right now. So those are my comments, and thanks very much for all your work.
Thank you, Irvin. Great. I loved your last hurrah for landscape equipment. Need that low-hanging fruit. Any other final questions or comments from the task force? And attendees wise, looks like we have 2 raised hands. And Danielle, are you the one that has to unmute the public?
Sure, I can start with, if we're ready for that, start with Clayton. Clayton, thank you for being so patient. You can unmute. Let me see, press this one more time. There
you hear
go.
me? Okay. First off, in my opinion, this is government overreach to a non-emergency. From a process point of view, I think the lack of public notice is exemplified by the complete lack of public participation in something that affects people's intimate and very personal lives, their actual how they live in their home. I think it also reflects a lack of appreciation to the virtues of natural gas. Namely, when the power goes out, like it did to many of us, once again during the recent storms, having gas allows us to continue to be able to cook and have hot water showers, which help revitalize the body, which I think is a very important health element. And I don't see any emphasis in any of this on doing anything to make the electrical infrastructure more resilient. I think also total electrification with these smart appliances, along with the advent of 5G, makes it possible to do complete surveillance of the activity going on within a residence, which I think is a breach of privacy. And it's a privacy issue that I think the public needs to have an honest investigation of. Also, I think in this I'm surprised constantly by the lack of nuclear energy in all of this stuff about the source of our electrical supplies. What we have here in the state, particularly around PG&E, is the increase in the dependence of renewables. And as we know about renewables, they're intermittent in nature, depending on sunshine, the cleanliness of panels, and also the wind, how much wind is blowing. And as a consequence, we need to have, for all this renewable energy brought online, we need to have an equal and corresponding amount of peaking plant power available, which is powered by natural gas, in order to keep a constant supply of what you call base energy in the system, so that the system doesn't burn out on itself. And
thank you. Thank you, Clayton.
You're really not allowing public input. You're just shutting me up.
We allow the public to speak for 3 minutes without discussion.
I haven't spoken for 3 minutes. I really haven't.
Thank you, Clayton, for your input. It's important to us. Appreciate your time and for coming to our meeting.
Somebody want to just make a comment just about just so everybody understands like where we are in the process and like where this gets vetted, in a bigger audience. I think that might be just helpful. Maybe Danielle, you want to make a comment just about, or Patrick, about how this is going to proceed, over the next couple of months.
Yeah, we are very early in the process, actually. And we will be allowing for public comment, and we'll be inviting the public to come to what we hope will be an open public meeting, potentially at a location like the community center, which will run like a workshop. And we'll have plenty of time for questions, for comments, for feedback. We want public input, absolutely. So we will welcome that. And I can't speak to a notification on this particular meeting, but I know that we have a 72-hour notification requirement in terms of getting information out to the public. And I believe that Danielle adhered to that. And we absolutely, we hope to have more members of the public to attend. So please spread the word.
And ultimately, the climate action plan, following, input from the community and this task force will eventually be reviewed and considered by the Planning Commission, and then which will be a public hearing and publicly noticed, and then final consideration by the City Council, which will be a public hearing and publicly noticed. But Danielle can chime in on the outreach, but we do publish information in our news, in our Mill Valley Connect, which is very extensive. There's thousands of contacts via the Mill Valley Connect, and we have our website that's devoted to this effort as well.
Thank you, Patrick. Marilyn Price, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just very quickly, I just want to thank you for doing this, for having the task force. And just to say, I love Urban's comment at the end. I think leaf blowers is a dynamite issue to tackle. I notice a lot of interest in it. And most important, we've got to reach the citizens and educate them. And this could be a good way to do that. Start with like the leaf blowers that nobody likes. And tell them more. You know, it's not just the noise, you guys. It's health and it's our environment. And I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for attending, and thanks for your comments. We have our next meeting scheduled for December 15th via Zoom, and the plan is to, this is our first time doing a readout with subcommittees. So a little bit of some learning here. If you have any feedback to Danielle or myself post-meeting, please let us know. I know we probably threw a lot of information at you all at once. It may have been a bit overwhelming. We have the transportation subcommittee that is preparing to provide a readout in December, but we're also recognizing that that is a huge body of work, and that will probably start in December and continue into January. Danielle or Christine, any other last comments you need to make to the task force this evening?
Just make one based on what I'm seeing and how the work's progressing. I think what we'll do for the December meeting is have a old business section where I would think that the task force should maybe provide we'll provide information beforehand, but maybe a bit more direction on what we need in terms of what we're incorporating into the climate action plan for the built environment based on what we're hearing, but then also understanding that's just the subcommittee recommendations, and we really need to then address that and get buy-in from the task force, as well as providing some opportunity for more public outreach on that. That will be old business, and then we can talk about new business. And I think maybe we'll have an education piece on transportation. So I don't know if that transportation subcommittee needs to report out, but maybe the subcommittee will have a meeting with Christine and I when we can gauge where their interests are and how we can help move that conversation along and their interests along. Maybe that will help.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think we'll need to have, we'll have some post-meeting conversations offline about the subcommittee that reported out this evening, because, these aren't start and stop subcommittees, and we want to give folks the opportunity to continue the great work, and then getting a better sense for what to queue up for December for transportation with Paul's group.
And I just like to leave it with Christine, because Christine has done this a lot. And so we should be listening to her to make sure we're somewhat on the same path.
Yeah, this all sounds really good. As you said, it was kind of a learning experience doing it this way. But I think it would be really helpful at the next meeting if we do get some specific recommendations from the entire task force about what to include. So we go through the energy, renewable energy, building decarbonization, energy efficiency, and then kind of start the conversation and get some of that background information out on transportation. So I thought it was a great meeting.
Thank you. Okay, that sounds great. If nothing else, I'll make a motion to, or I don't really have to make a motion, but I'm going to suggest we adjourn for the evening.
I'll second your non-motion.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.